The cold Seattle rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the streets into a maze of puddles and making life even harder for those who called the sidewalks home. Danny pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he sat, in his usual spot near the bustling Pike Place Market. The cardboard beneath him was soggy, but it was still better than sitting directly on the wet concrete. 3 years ago, Danny never imagined he would be here. He used to have a good job at a local factory, a small apartment with a view of the harbor and plans for the future. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. A heart attack at 42 had landed him in the hospital for weeks. The medical bills piled up faster than his insurance could cover them. When he couldn't work anymore, the rent became impossible to pay. One thing led to another, and suddenly he found himself on the streets with nothing but a backpack, full of memories. But Danny wasn't like some of the other homeless people in the area. He kept himself clean as much as possible, washing up in public restrooms and keeping his few belongings organized. His military training from years ago never really left him. He had served as an Army medic for 6 years before coming back home, to civilian life. The discipline and awareness he learned in the service stayed with him, even in his darkest moments. Every day, Danny would sit in the same corner near the market entrance. He had a small cardboard sign that simply read, "Anything helps, God bless." But he never pushed it on people or made them feel guilty for walking by. He understood that everyone had their own struggles. What most people didn't know was that Danny spent more time watching over others than worrying about himself. The area around Pike Place Market attracted all kinds of people. Tourists with expensive cameras and full wallets wandered around taking pictures and buying souvenirs. Local families came to shop for fresh fish and vegetables. Street performers played music and did tricks for tips. But it also attracted people with bad intentions, pickpockets, scammers, and thieves who saw easy targets among the distracted visitors. Danny had sharp eyes. Years of medical training had taught him to notice details that others missed. He could spot trouble from a block away. Over the months, he had quietly helped prevent several bad situations without anyone even knowing. He would position himself where he could see potential problems developing. Sometimes he would simply cough loudly to alert someone that they were being followed. Other times he would walk near tourists who looked lost or vulnerable until they found their way to safety. The other homeless people in the area respected Danny. He never caused trouble or fought over the best spots. He shared his food when he had extra and helped patch up injuries with his medical knowledge. The local shop owners had mixed feelings about homeless people in general, but they trusted Danny. He never stole anything or bothered customers. In fact, some of them had started leaving small jobs for him, sweeping sidewalks or moving boxes, in exchange for a few dollars or a hot meal. On this particular evening, the rain had finally stopped, but the streets were still slick and shiny under the streetlights. Danny was getting ready to find somewhere to sleep for the night when he noticed a young family walking slowly down the street. The father looked stressed, constantly checking his phone and looking around nervously. The mother was holding hands with 2 small children, a girl who looked about 6 and a boy who couldn't have been more than 4. They were clearly tourists. Their clothes were nice but not fancy, and they had that lost look that visitors often get when they venture away from the main tourist areas. The father kept stopping to look at his phone's GPS, obviously trying to figure out where they were going. The mother kept pulling the children closer to her and looking over her shoulder. Danny's instincts kicked in. He had seen this exact scenario play out too many times before. A family that looked out of place, carrying nice things, walking slowly and looking confused. They were perfect targets for the wrong kind of person. He quietly gathered his few belongings and started following them at a distance, keeping to the shadows but staying close enough to help if needed. The family turned down a side street that Danny knew well. It was a shortcut that locals used, but it was poorly lit and usually empty after dark. During the day it was fine, but at night it became the kind of place where bad things could happen. Danny quickened his pace, his military training automatically assessing potential threats and escape routes. As they walked deeper into the narrow street, Danny noticed another figure emerging from an alley about 50 yards ahead of the family. The person was wearing dark clothes and a hooded jacket pulled up over their head. They began walking in the same direction as the family, but their movements were different, purposeful and predatory. Danny's heart rate increased. He had seen enough violence in his life, both in the military and on the streets, to recognize when someone was hunting. The hooded figure was matching the family's pace, staying far enough back to avoid notice but close enough to make a move when the opportunity presented itself. The father was still focused on his phone, completely unaware of the danger building behind them. The mother was trying to keep the children entertained and calm, pointing out interesting things in the shop windows they were passing. The little girl was asking questions about everything she saw, while the boy was getting tired and starting to drag his feet. Danny made a decision. He couldn't just watch this happen. These were innocent people, a family just trying to have a nice evening together. They didn't deserve to become victims just because they took a wrong turn in an unfamiliar city. He had spent 3 years learning to be invisible on these streets, but sometimes being invisible wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to step up and be seen. He began closing the distance between himself and the family, moving as quietly as possible. His plan was simple. Get close enough to intervene if the hooded figure made a move, but stay far enough back to avoid scaring the family. He knew that his appearance might alarm them if they noticed him, but their safety was more important than their comfort. The street seemed to stretch on forever as this dangerous dance continued. The hooded figure gradually moved closer to the family. Danny moved closer to both of them. The father finally looked up from his phone and seemed to realize they were in a more isolated area than he had intended. He said something to his wife, and she nodded, pulling the children a little closer, but it was too late. The hooded figure had made their decision. Danny watched as they reached into their jacket and pulled out something that glinted under the dim streetlight. His blood ran cold as he realized what was about to happen. There was no more time for careful planning or staying hidden. In just a few seconds, this peaceful family's night was about to turn into their worst nightmare. Danny took a deep breath and prepared to do what he had trained for his entire adult life: protect people who couldn't protect themselves no matter what. It cost him personally. The moment Danny saw the knife catch the streetlight, time seemed to slow down. His heart pounded in his chest as years of military training kicked in automatically. He had seen weapons drawn in combat zones, but somehow this felt different. This was happening to innocent people on a quiet street in his own city. The hooded figure moved quickly now, closing the final distance to the unsuspecting family. The father was still looking at his phone, trying to figure out which direction would lead them back to the main street. The mother was adjusting the little boy's jacket because he had complained about being cold. The 6-year-old girl was skipping along, humming a song to herself, completely unaware that danger was approaching from behind. Danny didn't have time to think through all his options. He couldn't call out to warn the family because that might panic the children and make the situation worse. He couldn't call the police because by the time they arrived it would be too late. The only choice was to act, and act fast. The thief struck just as the family reached the darkest part of the street, where a burned-out streetlight had left a long shadow between two buildings. "Stop right there," the attacker said in a harsh whisper, stepping out of the darkness with the knife held low but visible. "Give me everything you got. Wallets, purse, phones, jewelry, right now." The father's head snapped up from his phone, and Danny watched as the man's face went pale with shock and fear. The mother instinctively pulled both children behind her, but the little girl started to cry when she saw the knife. The boy, too young to fully understand what was happening, began asking loudly why the man looked angry. "Please," the father said, his voice shaking. "We'll give you whatever you want, just don't hurt my family." His hands were trembling as he started to reach for his wallet, but he moved slowly, clearly terrified of making any sudden movements. That might set off the attacker. The thief was nervous too, Danny could tell. The man's eyes kept darting around, checking for witnesses or police. His grip on the knife was tight, but his hands were shaking slightly. This wasn't a professional criminal. This was someone desperate, which made him even more dangerous. Desperate people make poor decisions, and poor decisions can turn a robbery into something much worse. "Hurry up," the thief snapped, stepping closer to the family. "I don't have all night. And tell those kids to shut up before someone hears them." "That's When Danny made his move, he stepped out of the shadows about 20 feet behind the attacker and called out in a calm, steady voice, "Leave them alone." The thief spun around, surprised to discover he wasn't alone with his victims. When he saw Danny, a homeless man in worn clothes with several days' worth of stubble, his expression changed from surprise to anger. "Get out of here, old man. This has nothing to do with you." Danny took a step closer, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. His military training had taught him how to de-escalate situations, but he also knew when talking wouldn't work. "These people haven't done anything to you. Just walk away and nobody gets hurt." The father looked back and forth between Danny and the thief, not sure whether this new arrival was help or another threat. The mother was trying to keep the children quiet, whispering to them to stay behind her no matter what happened. The little girl had stopped crying but was clutching her mother's leg tightly. "I said get lost," the thief repeated, now pointing the knife in Danny's direction. "You think I won't use this? I got nothing to lose, man. Nothing to lose." Danny could hear the desperation in the man's voice, and it worried him. People with nothing to lose were the most dangerous kind of opponents. But he also noticed other things. The way the thief held the knife showed he probably wasn't used to using it as a weapon. The way he kept looking around suggested he was more scared than angry. And the way he talked suggested he was probably high on something, which made him unpredictable. "Look," Danny said, taking another small step forward. "Whatever's going on in your life, this isn't going to fix it. These people are just trying to get home to their hotel. They've got kids with them. You don't want to do something you can't. Take back." For a moment it seemed like the thief might actually listen. His grip on the knife loosened slightly, and Danny thought he saw doubt in the man's eyes. But then the little boy started crying again, and the sound seemed to break whatever spell Danny's words had created. "I told you to shut those kids up," the thief yelled, turning back toward the family with the knife raised. "And I told you to give me everything you got, now." That's when Danny knew talking wouldn't work. The situation was escalating too quickly, and the children were getting more scared by the second. In his experience, scared kids make noise, and noise makes desperate criminals do desperate things. He had to act before someone got seriously hurt. Danny moved forward quickly but carefully. His plan was to get close enough to grab the thief's weapon hand and control the knife until help could arrive. He had done similar things during his military service, but that was years ago, and he wasn't in the same physical condition he used to be. Still, he was probably the only chance this family had. The thief saw him coming and turned to face him, swinging the knife in a wide arc to keep Danny at a distance. "Stay back, I'm warning you," he shouted, but his voice cracked with fear and whatever substance was affecting his judgment. Danny ducked under the wild swing and grabbed for the man's wrist, using techniques he remembered from combat training. For a moment it worked. He got hold of the thief's arm and started to twist it, trying to make him drop the weapon. The two men struggled in the dim light, neither one much bigger than the other, but Danny had training and experience on his side. "Run," Danny called out to the family without taking his eyes off his opponent. "Get to the main street and call for help." The father didn't need to be told twice. He scooped up the little boy in his arms and grabbed his daughter's hand. "Come on," he told his wife, and the family started running back toward the brighter, busier part of the city. But the thief wasn't giving up. As he realized his victims were escaping, he became more violent, kicking and clawing at Danny while trying to pull his knife hand free. In the struggle, both men lost their footing on the wet pavement and crashed into the side of a building. Danny felt something sharp against his stomach, but adrenaline kept him fighting. He managed to slam the thief's hand against the brick wall, and finally heard the knife clatter to the ground. For a brief moment he thought it was over. That's when he looked down and saw the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Danny looked down at the dark stain spreading across his shirt and felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight was starting to wear off, and now he could feel the sharp, burning pain in his side. But even as he pressed his hand against the wound, his first thought wasn't about himself. "Are you okay?" he called out to the family, who had stopped running when they heard the knife hit the ground. They were about 30 feet away, huddled, together under a streetlight, looking back with frightened faces. The father took a tentative step forward. "Sir, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice filled with concern and disbelief. He couldn't quite process what had just happened. A complete stranger had risked his life to save them. Danny nodded toward the thief, who was sitting on the ground holding his head, dazed from hitting the wall during their struggle. "Someone needs to keep an eye on him," Danny said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing pain. "Don't let him get away." The mother had pulled out her phone and was already dialing 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hit the numbers. "Yes, hello, we need police and an ambulance," she said when the operator answered. "There's been an attack. A man with a knife tried to rob us, and someone else got hurt helping us." The little girl was crying quietly, still not fully understanding what had happened but sensing that something was very wrong. Her brother had his face buried in his father's shoulder, too scared to look around. The father was torn between wanting to help Danny and needing to comfort his children. "It's okay," Danny told them, sliding down the wall to sit on the wet pavement. The movement sent another sharp pain through his side, but he tried not to show it. "You're safe now. That's what matters." The thief was starting to recover from the impact with the wall. He looked around confused for a moment, then saw his knife lying several feet away. Danny saw him eyeing it and forced himself to move despite the pain. He couldn't let this guy get the weapon back and threaten the family again. "Don't even think about it," Danny said, positioning himself between the thief and the knife. The effort of moving made him dizzy, and he had to put his hand on the ground to steady himself. The father saw what was happening and made a decision. He handed his son to his wife and walked over to kick the knife further away, then stood near the thief to make sure he didn't try to run. "The police are coming," he told the man firmly. "Just stay where you are." The thief looked around at the situation he was now in, injured, surrounded, with sirens already audible in the distance. The reality of what he had done seemed to hit him all at once. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "I just needed some money. I didn't want to hurt nobody." Danny studied the man's face and saw something he recognized, the hollow look of someone who had lost everything and made bad choices trying to get it back. It was a look he had seen in the mirror during his own darkest days on the streets. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tommy," the thief replied, seeming surprised by the question. "Look, man, I'm sorry you got hurt, I really am. I haven't eaten in 3 days and I got kicked out of the shelter last week for breaking curfew. I wasn't thinking straight." The father looked back and forth between Danny and Tommy, amazed by this conversation. Here was a man who had just been stabbed, talking calmly to his attacker like they were having coffee together. It didn't make sense to him, but somehow it seemed to be working. "Being hungry doesn't give you the right to scare kids," Danny said, but his voice wasn't angry. It was more like a teacher explaining something to a student. "There are other ways to get help. Better ways." The sirens were getting closer now, and soon they could see flashing lights reflecting off the wet buildings. The mother was still on the phone with the 911 operator, giving their exact location and describing what had happened. She kept looking over at Danny with concern, watching as he grew paler by the minute. When the first police car arrived, everything happened very quickly. 2 officers got out with their hands on their weapons, not sure what they were walking into. The father immediately raised his hands and started explaining the situation. "The man in the dark clothes tried to rob us," he said, pointing to Tommy. "And this man saved us," he added, gesturing toward Danny. "But he's hurt and needs medical attention." The officers quickly assessed the scene. One of them handcuffed Tommy while the other called for backup and checked on Danny's condition. "How bad is it?" the officer asked, kneeling down beside him. "I've had worse," Danny replied, though that wasn't entirely true. The wound was deeper than he had first thought, and he was losing more blood than he wanted to admit. His military medic training told him he needed professional help soon. The ambulance arrived just as Danny was starting to feel really dizzy. The paramedics were professional and efficient, quickly cutting away his shirt to assess the wound and starting an IV to replace the blood he had lost. But even as they worked on him, Danny kept asking about the family. "Are the kids okay?" he asked the female paramedic who was checking his vital signs. They seemed pretty scared. "The family is fine," she assured him. "You did a good thing tonight. A very brave thing." As the paramedics loaded Danny onto a stretcher, the father approached with his family. The children were calmer now, though they stayed close to their parents. "I don't know how to thank you," the father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved our lives." Danny managed a weak smile. "You don't need to thank me. Just take care of those kids. They're lucky to have parents like you." The little girl stepped forward and handed Danny a small stuffed animal she had been carrying in her backpack. "This is my lucky bear," she said shyly. "Maybe he can help you get better." Danny felt tears in his eyes as he accepted the gift. In all his years on the streets, no one had given him something so precious. "I'll take good care of him," he promised. As the ambulance pulled away with Danny inside, the family stood on the sidewalk watching the red lights disappear into the night. The father put his arms around his wife and children, still processing what had happened. A homeless man, someone they might have walked past without a second thought on any other day, had risked everything to protect them. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to stop the bleeding and repair the damage from the knife wound. Danny drifted in and out of consciousness, but whenever he was awake, he found himself thinking about the family and hoping they had made it safely back to their hotel. He clutched the little girl's stuffed bear in his hand, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures can mean the most. Danny woke up in the hospital 3 days later to find his room filled with people he didn't recognize. For a moment, he thought he might be dreaming or having some kind of reaction to the pain medication. There were flowers on every available surface, cards taped to the walls, and at least a dozen people sitting in chairs or standing around his bed. The first person he recognized was the father from that night, the man whose family he had protected. But he looked different now, cleaned up and wearing a nice suit instead of the casual tourist clothes from before. When he saw Danny's eyes open, his face lit up with relief. "You're awake," the man said, standing up quickly. "How are you feeling? The doctor said you lost a lot of blood, but you're going to be okay." Danny tried to sit up but felt a sharp pain in his side where they had stitched up the knife wound. "I'm fine," he said automatically, though he clearly wasn't. "Are your kids okay? Your wife?" "They're perfect," the father replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you. My name is Robert, by the way. Robert Chen. I own a few electronics stores here in the city." Danny nodded, still confused about all the people in his room. "I'm Danny," he said simply. "But who are all these folks?" A woman stepped forward from the group. She was wearing a press badge and holding a small recording device. "Mr. Danny, I'm Katie from Channel 7 News. We've been following your story since it happened. You've become quite famous around here." "Famous?" Danny laughed, but it hurt his. "Lady, I think you got the wrong guy. I'm just a homeless man who got in a fight." Robert pulled up a chair next to Danny's bed. "That's not how the story went viral," he said. "After we got back to our hotel that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. A complete stranger risked his life for my family. I had to do something." He pulled out his phone and showed Danny a web page. "I started a crowdfunding campaign to help pay for your medical bills. I thought maybe we could raise a few $100s. But then the local news picked up the story, and it just exploded." Danny stared at the screen, not believing what he was seeing. The fundraising page showed a total that made his head spin, over $200,000 and still climbing. There were thousands of comments from people all over the country, sharing their own stories and praising Danny for his courage. "This can't be real," Danny whispered. "People don't just give money to strangers like this." An elderly man standing near the window spoke up. "Son, you're not a stranger to us anymore. You're a hero. What you did for that family, that's the kind of person this world needs more of." The man introduced himself as Frank, and Danny was shocked to learn he was the owner of the coffee shop where Danny sometimes sat outside on cold mornings. "I've been watching you for 2 years," Frank said. "You never caused trouble, never asked for handouts. But I saw you help people, like that time you helped Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries when she fell, or when you talked that young kid out of doing something stupid to himself." Danny's eyes widened. He had no idea anyone had noticed those small acts of kindness. To him, they were just the right thing to do. Nothing special or heroic about them. A younger woman stepped forward, and Danny recognized her as one of the nurses who had taken care of him. "The whole hospital is talking about you," she said with a smile. "When you were unconscious, you kept asking if the family was safe. Even when you were hurt and scared, you were thinking about other people." Robert leaned forward in his chair. "That's not all," he said. "The story has brought out people from all over the neighborhood. They've been coming forward with stories about times you helped them over the years. Did you know you've become something of a legend around Pike Place Market?" A police officer who had been standing quietly in the corner stepped forward. "I'm Officer Johnson. I was one of the first responders that night. In 15 years on the force, I've never seen anything like what you did. Most people run away from trouble. You ran toward it to help strangers." Danny felt overwhelmed by all the attention. He had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, just surviving day by day on the streets. The idea that people had been watching him and caring about him was almost too much to process. "There's more," Robert continued. "The story has been shared on social media millions of times. People from all over the world have been donating money and sending messages of support. But it's not just about the money, it's about what you represent." Katie, the news reporter, showed Danny her tablet with dozens of video messages from people who had been inspired by his story. Teachers were using it to talk to their students about courage and kindness. Parents were explaining to their children that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're ordinary people who do extraordinary things. "But I'm not a hero," Danny protested weakly. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's exactly why you are a hero," Frank said firmly. "You think what you did was normal, but it wasn't. Most people would have kept walking. You risked your life for people you didn't even know." Robert's wife entered the room carrying the 2 children Danny remembered from that frightening night. The little girl was holding a large card covered in crayon drawings, and the boy was clutching a new stuffed animal, a companion for the lucky bear his sister had given to Danny. "We wanted to thank you again," Robert's wife said softly. "And to let you know that you'll always be part of our family now. What you did for us, there's no way to repay that." The little girl approached Danny's bed shyly. "Are you feeling better?" she asked in a small voice. "Daddy says you got hurt because you were protecting us." Danny felt tears forming in his eyes. "I'm feeling much better now, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." She handed him the card she had made, covered in drawings of stick figures and hearts. "I drew a picture of you being brave," she said proudly. "Mommy helped me write thank you at the top." As Danny looked around the room at all these people who had come to visit him, he realized something had changed forever. For 3 years, he had felt invisible and forgotten. But now he understood that his actions had always mattered even when no one seemed to notice. Every small kindness, every moment of looking out for others had been building toward something bigger. The fundraising campaign continued to grow, but more importantly, Danny's story had started conversations in communities across the country about how we treat our most vulnerable neighbors. It had reminded people that heroism comes in all forms, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the very ones holding our society together with quiet acts of courage and compassion. 2 weeks later, Danny was finally ready to leave the hospital. His physical wounds had healed well, but the emotional impact of everything that had happened was still sinking in. The doctors had cleared him for discharge, but he had no idea where he was supposed to go. For 3 years, home had been whatever doorway or alley he could find for the night. Robert arrived early that morning with a surprise that would change everything. "Danny, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday," he said, pulling up a chair next to the hospital bed. "You mentioned that you used to work in security before you ended up on the streets." Danny nodded, remembering their talk about his past life. "Yeah, but that was a long time ago. I'm not sure anyone would hire me now looking the way I do." "What if I told you that someone already wants to hire you?" Robert asked with a smile. "My electronics stores have been having problems with theft and customer safety. After seeing what you did that night, I realized you're exactly the kind of person I need working for me." Danny stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering me a job?" "Robert, I appreciate everything you've done, but I've been living on the streets for 3 years. I don't even have clean clothes or a place to shower regularly." Robert held up his hand to stop Danny's protests. That's the other part of my offer. There's a small apartment above my main store downtown. It used to be storage space, but we converted it into a studio apartment a few years ago. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. It could be yours if you want it. The room fell silent as Danny processed what he was hearing. A job. An apartment. A chance to rebuild his life. It seemed too good to be true, like something that happened to other people in movies, not to homeless veterans who had given up hope years ago. "Why would you do this for me?" Danny asked quietly. "You don't owe me anything, I just did what anyone should have done." "That's exactly why I'm doing this," Robert replied. "Because you think what you did was normal. Because even when you had nothing, you were still protecting other people. That's the kind of character I want in my business and in my life." Over the next few days, Danny's transformation began. The community that had rallied around his story didn't stop at just raising money. Local businesses donated clothes, toiletries, and everything he would need to start over. The barber shop near Robert's store offered free haircuts and grooming services. A local restaurant provided meals during his first week of work. But the key, most surprising change was in Danny himself. For 3 years, he had felt worthless and invisible. Now everywhere he went, people recognized him and thanked him for what he had done. Children would wave at him from car windows. Elderly people would stop him on the street to shake his hand and share their own stories of kindness. Danny's first day at work was overwhelming in the best possible way. Robert's employees welcomed him like family, and customers who recognized him from the news stories would specifically seek him out to say hello. His job was officially listed as customer relations and security, but in reality he became the heart of the store. His military training and street experience had taught him to read people well. He could spot potential shoplifters before they acted, but, more importantly, he could tell when someone was struggling and needed help. Instead of just catching thieves, Danny found himself connecting with people who were going through hard times. One afternoon, about a month into his new job, a teenage boy came into the store looking nervous and desperate. Danny recognized the signs immediately. The same look he had seen in Tommy's eyes that night in the alley. Instead of watching the boy suspiciously, Danny approached him with kindness. "You looking for anything specific today?" Danny asked casually. "Two." Boy fidgeted with his hands. "I need a phone charger, but I don't have much money." Danny could tell there was more to the story. "What's going on? You seem upset about something." After some gentle questioning, the boy admitted that his family had been evicted from their apartment and they were living in their car. His phone was their only connection to potential jobs and housing assistance, but the charger had broken. Instead of just selling him a charger, Danny talked to Robert about the situation. Together, they not only gave the boy what he needed, but also connected his family with local resources that helped them find temporary housing and eventually get back on their feet. Word of Danny's approach to helping customers spread throughout the community. People started coming to the store not just to shop, but to talk to the man who had become a symbol of hope and second chances. Robert had to hire additional staff to handle the increased business. But Danny's biggest project was still taking shape in his mind. He had been thinking about Tommy, the man who had attacked them that night. Through his connections with the police and social services, Danny learned that Tommy was still in jail, struggling with addiction and mental health issues. Against everyone's advice, Danny decided to visit Tommy in jail. The meeting was awkward at first. Two men sitting across from each other, separated by thick glass, connected by a terrible night that had changed both their lives. "I didn't expect to see you here," Tommy said, his voice filled with shame. "I heard about what happened to you after what I did. I'm sorry, I'm really, really sorry." Danny looked at the man who had stabbed him, and instead of anger, he felt something unexpected. Understanding. "We all make mistakes when we're desperate," Danny said. "The question is what we do next." That visit was the beginning of something that surprised everyone, including Danny himself. He started a program to help formerly homeless veterans get back on their feet. Using his own experience and the connections he had made through his story, Danny created a network of support that included job training, housing assistance, and mental health resources. Robert provided space in his stores for the program's offices, and the community that had rallied around Danny's story now had a concrete way to help others. The little girl who had given Danny her lucky bear was now 8 years old, and she convinced her school to collect donations for Danny's program as a class project. 6 months after that terrifying night in the alley, Danny stood in front of a crowd of over 500 people at a community center, receiving an award for his service to the homeless community. But the speech he gave wasn't about heroism or recognition. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over, he told the crowd. I thought I was invisible and worthless. But what I learned is that every single person has value, and every act of kindness matters, no matter how small it seems. He looked out at the audience and saw Robert's family in the front row, the little girl still clutching a newer version of her lucky bear. He saw Frank from the coffee shop, Officer Johnson, and dozens of other people whose lives had intersected with his in small but meaningful ways. We all have the power to change someone's life, Danny continued. Sometimes it's as simple as seeing them when others look away. Sometimes it's offering a job to someone everyone else has given up on. And sometimes it's just standing up when standing up is the right thing to do. The transformation was complete, but Danny knew it was really just the beginning.